One moment. Hi, everybody. It's great to have everyone here with us tonight. We are really excited to have Kat with us from Maryland, zooming all over from America. This is our first in our series of Harvest Lectures, and we've got kind of 4 weeks of chats tonight. So the truth is that we were chatting beforehand, Kat and I, and there's so many kind of things that resonate between the work of Hazelnut and her charity as well. And so we're really excited to kind of have a bit of an hour-long kind of discussion, or kind of a presentation discussion. So, Kat, I'm going to hand it right over to you and take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much. And thank you all for having me. I'm really excited to be talking with you about some of our work at the Hoenke Conservation Center. Share my screen. Let me know when you can see that. Okay, cool. Yeah, so again, thank you so much. I have to admit, just right off the bat, I don't know a ton about the UK and all of the ways that y'all are working to care for creation. So really interested to learn more from you as well as we have our discussion. But I will just straight up start with our organization. The Hoenke Conservation Center is a Catholic nonprofit national organization in the US working to restore faith in the footsteps of Saint Kateri Tekakwitha. And we are primarily an online organization because we are all volunteers. All of the staff and board are volunteers. But we promote faith, integral ecology, and the diversity of life. We were founded 22 years ago, but we became a nonprofit in 2012. And we envision a faithful, loving home on earth for all people and the whole of God's creation. So we were named after Saint Kateri. Saint Kateri is a Native American saint. She was born in the 1600s. She was the first Native American saint in the United States to be canonized, and she is Mohawk or Haudenosaunee. And she was just a very, very, very devoted to Christ and had a very strong faith. And the reason for our choosing Saint Kateri as our patron saint for our center is that for us in the US, our indigenous peoples really are equipped with a traditional ecological knowledge to help us in conserving creation and living in harmony with the earth. And obviously we have not done a very good job at all of respecting their nations and listening to their leadership in this effort. So we named our center after Saint Kateri. And so as an organization, our staff, we're all professional ecologists and educators. By day, we're all volunteers. So I am, by day, I work for a fish habitat partnership, which is essentially a nonprofit that works to restore rivers. I remove dams and fix road culverts for my day job. And I also map all of the fish barriers in the United States for the Fish and Wildlife Service. So that is my day job. But our executive director, he works for a nonprofit that removes invasive plants in the state of New York. And we also have other volunteers that are educators. And we also have a women majority board, and we have Indigenous representatives on our board. And so we are a small organization, but we do cover all of the US. And in general, our philosophy is that in order to care for the earth, we are promoting others to experience an ecological conversion through understanding how faith integrates with nature, and also to really understand and appreciate and love the earth. And so once we have that, we want to encourage others to change the way they view the land, and in doing so, then change the way that we care for the land. And so that's really the way that we're working through our organization to make change and bring people of faith into this community of practice to really start to care for the earth in a different way on our community spaces and our own properties. And so we believe this has to be a comprehensive approach. It's important to really take that local perspective and learn what's around you, what should be there, what should have been there based on history, and therefore what could be there now, And once you really learn to appreciate all the things around you and learn what is there, you'll love it, and then in turn want to protect it. And so through that, both education and faith and ecology, but having that ethics of place, which really is an indigenous perspective of really understanding the history of where you're from, and understanding what creatures and relationships interact with all of the creatures and plants and animals on where you live. And through that, therefore, habitat restoration and land preservation and other ways to care for the earth. And so we take this approach through our many programs. We have several different programs. We have a Sanctuary Habitat program, an education and outreach program, Catholic Ecology Library, our land trust, and we also have our new Indigenous Peoples program. And so I'll go over all of these a little bit to share more about how we are working to make change in this through this perspective. I'm sorry, my dog is scratching himself. Okay, so in general, we're starting off, and some of this comes from, I spoke to 300 middle school students recently, and so I found some of these slides were really helpful in breaking it down for me and how I'm like communicating things. But the best way to have an ecological conversion really is to learn to love nature so that you want to protect it. And then also pray and explore your faith to see how our faith really connects to nature. The way that I wouldn't call it a reversion, because I was always Christian, I was always Catholic, but being an ecologist myself, I never actually put two and two together with how the faith truly connected to my work and my love for nature. But through coming through to the center, I started to really actually take a look at my own backyard, not just what I was doing at work, and really trying to understand the little things that live in my backyard and how they all interact with one another, and how all of those relationships are so important to the creatures that live there, and how they need to continue to have these healthy relationships and really resilient ecosystems in order for people to survive. I wasn't really thinking that way, even though I worked in the field. And the way that I came to know that was to really explore my faith and the connection between the two. And so one of the things that we are always telling people that come to our center is to read the book of nature, go outside and really understand and look at the little things that are in your yard and in our communities, not just, the charismatic big megafauna or going to the department store and buying plants, but go out there and look and identify what you see outside. Learn about what should be there, what type of biome or what type of ecosystem are you living in, and what is in your yard, what should be there and what isn't there but should be there. And so one of the things that we promote among people online through our social media, we have a lot of social media followers, and we're always promoting that people use iNaturalist. Some of y'all probably heard about iNaturalist before. We promote iNaturalist as a way to collect data for a lot of scientists and some of our projects, but also to help people be able to identify what's out there in their yard. So iNaturalist is a free application, and it allows you to take pictures of organisms outside, and it'll identify for you what they are, and it keeps track of how many you have cataloged. And then scientists can actually use that data to understand the different populations of what lives in different places. And one of the things that we've also done is try to create projects for every parish or church, school that wants to track that on their specific property. And so we've really been working with people to take this approach of really understanding what's around them. We have a BioBlitz every year where people can sign up and use the app, and we can catalog how many different people of faith have joined our project and observed different species. And so that is helping people to really learn what's around them and understand kind of, for me, the spring ephemerals and the crocus, I heard you mention crocus earlier, those like spring ephemeral flowers are some of the most beautiful things, and have really made me want to learn more about the different species that depend on certain host plants and things like that in my yard. And so we currently have a lot of different observations out there through this, and you can see kind of, if you go onto iNaturalist, you can see just the sheer number of different species observed. And so that's one thing that we do to help people understand what's going on around them in their yards and on their church properties. But apart from also learning what's on your property in an ecological sense, we also have an ecology library that puts together a lot of the different writings from Scripture in Old and New Testament, but then also in the different, for the Catholic perspective, the different quotes and things from popes, but we also have saint quotes and all of the different ways that you can see how nature and ecology is just embedded in and completely interwoven into our faith in a way that people haven't always thought about. And so this, in addition to that, the concept of ethics of place, as I mentioned, is not just about organisms, it's also about people. And so for us in the US, we have many different nations, First Nations peoples. These are all the different overlapping traditional homelands, stolen land, that have traditionally belonged to Native peoples, and most Native people are now living in Oklahoma and on reservations. And obviously it's very tragic and terrible, but you can see for us, what we want to encourage people to do is to look and put their home in the here and see who lived there before, what happened to them, where are they now? And that is really important. We have a couple of Indigenous women on our board, and that is something that they always are helping our supporters and people that come upon our sites to understand is, who lived here before and where are they now and what were their practices to care for the land. And so that's a big piece of what we're promoting here. So one of the things that is part of this is how to live more in harmony with nature. And I know, I'm not sure exactly how it looks where y'all are now, but for us, we're still very much obsessed with the lawn out in the US. We have lots of really short turf, non-native plant lawns, sculpted non-native hedges, and all of it points back to the desire to look wealthy, honestly. And we're trying to really help people to change the way they see their lawn and their home, and change the way they live with other organisms and care for the land. And so for us, one of the biggest ways to do that is to shift people from this desire to have these lawns to wanting to restore native plant habitat and improve biodiversity. And a lot of that, people don't see the need to do that until they truly love nature. So if the first part is helping people to love creation and see the necessity to do that with their faith, and then how does that work? Well, with us being ecologists, we are very much promoting the restoration of native plants. And so we want people's church properties, their homes, their religious orders, all of these spaces to go from the bottom of the lawn to the top. So, obviously creatures need habitat, and habitat destruction is the #1 cause of decreases in biodiversity. But planting native plants on your property, the more native plants you have, it is a linear relationship to how biodiverse your property is, and we need resilient biodiverse ecosystems to survive. And so these are the ways that we're really just trying to bring people to change that, and by planting native plants. And so we have a habitat program. This is a habitat certification, where essentially you can, if your home meets several of these requirements, then you are designated a St. Kateri habitat. And we have these signs, we have a map where people can explore all of the registered habitat. So we're really trying to build this community of people of faith that can inspire others to do the same. And so in order to register, you have to have at least one religious element to the property, but also have native plants. And then we share the habitats on our story map, and also evangelize people to come to faith. Here are some of the other criteria. So you need to have food, water, cover, and space for people and wildlife, because it's an integral ecology, the relationships with people and wildlife. But also, things like clean energy. Not all of these are required, but 6 elements. And then you can be designated as a St. Kateri habitat. So we encourage people who want to be registered to identify just that same ethics of place we were just talking about, learn about what should be there, including people, and also then move towards changing what's going on their properties. And we do allow for national habitats, and that people don't need to be any flavor of Christianity, or we would even accept, Buddhists. Whoever wants to be a habitat can be one, as long as they're cool with it, having a sign that says St. Kateri Habitat on their property. We don't exclude anyone, and this one is international. So we have several habitats that are all over the world. You can learn more about it at stkateri.org or kateri.org, sorry. But here's just a little look at our habitat map. All of the different habitats that we have, the different colors represent different types of property. We have mostly private, so having really ministering to lay people in what they're doing at home is really leading the charge, I think. And then religious orders have kind of been doing this a lot longer than even we have, but we have been seeing a lot more change happening in parishes and shrines and things like that too. This is just a look at a couple of them, just that I thought were really pretty. This is a monastery actually in Canada, kind of the gold standard. I don't know. They live in the wilderness, but it's really beautiful. And so when you register, you get a dot on the map, and people can click and see pictures of your property. It doesn't have to be on your home. It can be on your parish or associated with another public type space. But this is my house. That's my daughter. And this is really when I started to change what I was doing in my own yard, which is kind of sad that it took so long to do that. But I planted a rain garden with all kinds of native plants, specifically for we have monarch butterfly for us, lots of host plants for different insects. This is the St. Kateri National Shrine in Fonda, New York. It's a really beautiful place. St. Kateri was baptized by the water that was at one of the springs in the property. Then we have several different people's homes where they're growing food in conjunction with water management and planting native plants and gardens and everything. And then parishes too, where we're really seeing changes with the parish community and the pastor and everybody there trying to really change the way that the property is managed, and blessing the habitat and everything. It's been really beautiful to see a lot of these changes. And we also have, I think actually this is a parish too, so they are actually going full swing into taking away the whole lawn and making it into an entirely native garden. And then we also have schools too. But this is actually one where we have been taking the initiative to reach out to parishes and try to get them to change a little bit of what they're doing. We have a horticulturist on staff. She's a volunteer as well. And so she's been helping with that. And we have a lot of schools with curricula and environmental clubs and care for creation ministries. One of the other things that we've been doing is also encouraging people to plant Mary gardens, but with native plants. So much of the typical native plants that we, or the typical plants in a Mary garden are not indigenous to the United States. So we have been working with a horticulturist to find the cousins of certain plants that are native to the US, like columbine. We have native columbine species. We have several other native species. And so really trying to build these designs for parishes and people that for their specific region, what could they plant that's native that still has a Marian nexus? So trying to really work in different ways to promote the native plants. And so as we're looking at this holistically, the other things that, especially if you have larger properties that we've been working on, is to work to bring back indigenous crops. And so for us in the US, many of the First Nations tribes, they have had varieties of corn that were sacred to them that only grow in certain parts of the country. And because they were forced to move, they can no longer grow their corn. That corn does not grow where they currently live. And so our Indigenous Programs Coordinator, her name is Ronnie O'Brien. She's been working for 20 years for the Pawnee Nation to bring back 16 varieties of corn. And the Pawnee Nation traditionally lived in Nebraska, and they were forced to live in Oklahoma, and their corn did not grow. And there were 150 kernels left in a jar, and they trusted Ronnie enough to try to grow some of it in her land in Nebraska. And through 20 years of work, they've been able to create a nonprofit organization called the Pawnee Seed Society, where they have brought back all that corn and given it back to the tribe, and they now are able to have that corn for their ceremonies and for their people. And so Ronnie wanted to take that idea and really utilize it through the Sanctuary Conservation Center to work with a network of Catholic gardeners and Christian gardeners. And so we have been doing that a little bit with a seed saver. He's Episcopalian, actually, and he has helped us with finding tribes that want to work with us. So we've worked with the Wichita tribe, which traditionally lived in Texas, and we grew some of their corn on some monastery land and gave all of that back to them. So it is indigenous led, this program, and we give the corn back to the tribe. They don't keep any of it. And so that is one program. It's a little bit slower going because obviously there's a lot of trust issues that have to be rebuilt. But this is a really interesting program that we've been trying to work into the entirety of our holistic approach to caring for the land, especially in places where people have access to, and it's really a small 15 by 15 square of land that you need to grow some of this corn. But it's just another tool in the toolbox for people to manage their land differently. And then we also have our land trust, and our land trust is for preservation. A lot of the church property in the US, there's lots of church property, and a lot of it is not built, especially religious order property too. There's lots of natural land out there that could be preserved forever. And we wanted to make a National Catholic Land Trust that could do that. We just acquired our first property. It's actually a property that was donated to us by a couple who saved this entire piece of property out from a developer. And it's and I've been to a lot of places in the US with my day job, and I've never seen a place this beautiful, actually. It has a brook trout stream on it. It is covered in forest and swamp and beautiful, just amazing, amazing property. And so this is 150 acres, and it is a forever wild property. So it does not have any public access. It was by the desire of the owners. But it's got moose and bear and fish and porcupine. It's really, really beautiful. And our goal is to acquire more property in danger of being urbanized, especially property owned by religious organizations that need to get rid of property in order to pay for other expenses that they may have, or that they want to preserve forever. We can offer that. And so this is just a couple of pictures. This is our brook trout stream. And it's just an incredible piece of property and a really nice case study for what we hope will be more land acquisitions and conservation easements. So I just, with all of that and kind of what we're working on, the last piece I just wanted to share is how we're trying to move forward. A lot of the owners of land that have come to us to be registered as Sanctuary Habitat or have connected with us are people that have been doing this work for a really long time already, which is great, but we really want to spur that change in people and how they view their habitat in community spaces at their church and their school. And so we're really trying to promote this holistic approach through a new program called Parish Arcs. And it's essentially the idea that we want the church in America to be these properties to be like mini Noah's Arks, where we're hoping to promote the conservation and of biodiversity, and really these strongholds and safe spaces for biodiversity and for nature, and promoting this more, not just a small garden, but the whole property being transformed in a way that's more holistic. And so with that, one of the inspirations for that has really been the Irish bishops and their directive to have all parishes conserve 30% of their open area for pollinators and biodiversity. And this has been inspiring to us because it's definitely one of those top-down directives that I think really, really asks people to do something different. And we happen to now have a current grant with the University of Notre Dame, where we're looking at a specific diocese in Indiana, all of their parish parcels and other properties, other Catholic properties. And so we're looking at right now, my day job is GIS and deep learning and mapping of and trying to prioritize high priority areas to restore. And so what we're doing is with this specific project is looking at these properties using high resolution imagery and artificial intelligence to map out the different land cover types of these church properties and be able to say how much lawn is there, how much forest, how much impervious surface. And with that, we can say, okay, 22% of your land area is lawn. This is how much, this is 30% of that you should be converting into native plants, and we can show you how to do that. We can also identify the biggest forest patches, which ones are the highest priority for preservation, and work with our land trust program to do that. And so that's really the holistic way that we're hoping to do this, and setting other goals. So not just the 30% of lawn, but how can we also set goals for forest and forest protection and impervious surface? You know, say you have X% impervious surface, what percent should be permeable, and how do we do that? So that's the more targeted, holistic approach we're trying to take with specifically churches, and other, also religious orders could be that way as well, to try to actually help people take a directive like that and equate it to on the ground, like, how do I do this? And so that's kind of all I had, just a really 100,000-foot view really quickly. But if anybody has any questions, I can definitely elaborate on some of those things. Sorry, that's my son coming home from school and yelling at the dog.
Oh, that was so great. Thanks so much. There's so much to cover and talk about now. I was really inspired. So I'll just like open it up. You can either type your question down, or if you have a question to ask, that'd be great. While you're thinking, I'll throw out the first one. And really, I don't know if it's a question as much of a thought. So that ARC project is really interesting. One of the because well, we at Hazelden, we work with people from lots of different denominations, but a lot of Church of England churches, and that obviously there's a parish system here that's set up as well. And I guess I've been dreaming for a while about the idea of like a food parish. Like, could we get a parish somewhere that would be interested in engaging and saying we want to encourage not only our church but our different members, lay members that own land, the vicarage, different public spaces, schools, to convert X number into biodiverse places that both grow food for people and for animals, and then kind of match the okay, well, we were able to produce this amount of food, it made this impact, these are some of the events we did. And so in a sense, it kind of like really inspired me, because I was like, someone's kind of doing something like that, and it made me think I'm not crazy. That sounds like such a great project. So well done. I guess I didn't have a question there, other than you've inspired me to keep thinking about the thing that's been inside of my heart for a while. So well done. That's really, really great stuff you're doing.
Thank you. And that's like, for us, we don't have as much of the expertise in the food side of things, but I love that. And I think, a few of the Cincateri habitats that I've registered, some of them are growing food for food pantries. And I think the idea of everybody, sort of banding together to upscale this whole effort, because right now, I mean, everything is, I hate to say it, but the way that the outlook in terms of climate change and everything else is kind of very disconcerting. But at the same time, if we could all just, put other things aside and band together and really create these more transformational type of programs that can link everyone together to just elevate these issues and these efforts, I think this is really what we kind of need to do at this point.
Yeah, that's how I feel. It was quite inspiring, actually, to think you've managed to achieve what you've achieved over there. And I think really working with the indigenous populations, I'm really pleased that you're doing that, because it's something that's worried me, how we've treated people and the environment. And I just feel really inspired by what you've been saying tonight. And yes, I think every time I see something somebody's doing whatever, I think, yes, this is really what we want to be doing. We need to be working with making it sustainable, working with the land and everything else. So, yeah.
Fantastic.
Sorry. Thank you.
Bryony, do you have a question next?
I'm trying to unmute. I wondered about the balance, because I really enjoyed when you were talking about getting native plants and developing plantings around that. And I'm also aware that for us, we live in a very diverse community, and one of our aspirations is to try and grow plants that kind of reflect some of the interests and populations around us. And there seems to be a bit of a tension in that, in terms of what's native and what will engage our communities, which might be growing the sort of food they want to eat or flowers that they've had. So I wondered where that balance lies.
Yeah, I think that's that can be challenging. And I think one of the things that, and I was just mentioning this before we talked, before we started, was we have we've had a professor, his name is Doug Tallamy, and he's a professor, an entomology professor at University of Delaware, but he's kind of become famous around in the US for people that are gardening, because he very much promotes biodiversity and native plantings. But I think he's realistic in the fact that not everybody is going to always plant native plants all the time. There are naturalized plants, there are food plants, there are other plants that we need. And his goal has always been, I think 70% of the plants around you should be native. So you can also plant other things, but you want generally around you want to also have enough native plants to sustain the populations of the native organisms around you. So it's definitely not, go all one way and there's no flexibility. I have some lawn, especially for things like sports and gatherings, and I also have other types of non-native plants, and a food garden and everything else. But I think it's just generally where you have the space, try to fill it with native plants when you can, and more native than non-native, I guess, and not invasive, as long as they're not invasive too.
We have a tranche of plants supplied, but which are kind of like discarded from supermarket plants, so they also go into the mix, which is, it's free, so we take it. So that's a third strand.
That's awesome.
Pippa, I think you got a question now.
Yeah, I'm interested in your work with indigenous peoples, because obviously kind of Western colonialism and domination kind of did so much of the damage environmentally and was so responsible for climate change. And I'm just interested if you could unpack a little bit more how we're addressing that aspect with the indigenous people we're working with.
It's breaking up a lot. Was the question to elaborate more on the Indigenous program?
Pippa,
yeah, because we're really responsible for a lot of the mess. So, okay, hang on.
Sorry, you're just breaking up. I think while you're typing it out, I'll just to say, I love the corn stuff. I mean, not only do I love corn, but we are growing jeweled corn here as well. But I think it's interesting to I think by growing it and giving it back and seeing it as sacred, I think that's really interesting in terms of engaging with folks where they're at, rather than trying to, kind of just convert them, because within Christianity, corn's not sacred, therefore you should probably come this route. So I just think that's a really beautiful thing, to be able to engage people where they're at and honor their history and their culture as well. So I think that's just a stunning piece of work you're doing. And also, man, those beautiful pieces of the old types of corn are so stunning and wonderful. I'd love to see pictures of them. sorry, while I keep talking about corn, I could talk about my love for corn all night. So let's read Pippa's question. We're very responsible for climate crisis. Wondering if you could elaborate on relationship with Indigenous peoples. Yeah, so just kind of unpack more about why you think that's important, and yeah, address that.
Yeah, and I'll just preface this by saying that I'm definitely not an expert in this area, and Ronnie is really the one that has been doing all of this work for a long time, mostly with the Pawnee Nation before she came to be with us, and so she currently works for them in their Pawnee Seed Preservation Society. So I can't speak for Indigenous peoples, but yeah, not controlling agendas. I think, and one of the biggest things that we've seen too, especially, we have some Indigenous board members, and just really, I think we're in like a very big listening stage right now. And I think that is really where we need to be, especially, we're really struggling with the boarding school issue right now, and really trying to figure out the best way to right, if you can right the wrongs, but really try to listen to people and hear what they're saying and what they need, and meet people where they are, like you're saying, in terms of how we build reconciliation into the work that we're doing. And so with having our Indigenous board members, really having them help to sign off on it and approve the ways that we are moving forward in our programs, but then also I think thinking about the native plant piece, not just the corn piece, but native plants were used by native people forever to do all kinds of things. And a lot of, in the US, I mean, we're totally divorced from all of that. And so through that planting of the native plants, what we're hoping to do too, through these larger properties, we haven't done this yet, so I'm just saying that this is a goal of ours, but we haven't done it yet, is to really look at, is there a way to give land back to the different nations that come from religious owned property? And if that's not a full thing that can be achieved, is there a way to, if you're planting native plants, can you also grant access to different Indigenous people to come and harvest? We have things like the different plants, that cedars and things like that, for them to harvest different plants that they need on these properties, and access the property for different ceremonies and things like that. So that's something that we want to do moving forward. Our Indigenous program now is very much like a pilot study, just because it again, building that trust is a lot. And then there's also a lot of COVID effects, and with different tribes and things where they're just really focused on these issues, not necessarily growing stuff. But I think it has to be everything. It can't just be one thing. So how do we, not just corn, but all of the ways that they can have access to these properties, or give it back, and how do we get to that place? I don't know the full answer to that, but that's kind of where we hope to go with it. And it's definitely a bottom-up thing with our organization, and a lot of rumblings. It's definitely not something that is coming from, the top down in the church, for sure, in terms of land, I guess.
And that brings us to a good question that we were kind of speaking about before, is I think the UK is in a bit of a different space in terms of politics, at least when it comes to kind of climate emergency. But that's kind of changing. We've just had a huge rollback just this week with our government of eco policies. It's still not like a deal. And so in a church that's in America, obviously, really can take eco things as woke, or kind of a hill to die on, in terms of like, this isn't something we're so you say there's a lot of ground up. So talk to me a bit about, like, what is it like being a conservationist that's a Christian conservationist around churches that sometimes don't really want you to be doing your work, or see what you're doing as wrong?
Yeah, it's really, man, I could talk about that for a long time, because there's a lot of weird things that interweave there. And and even, you know, operating in my day job is very interesting too, because I think if you have we have like different camps that people sit in terms of their understanding of how to conserve the environment. There are actually a lot of, you know, what you would consider to be, I guess, for better, you know, Republican Party side of things that are conservationists for hunting and fishing and everything else. And there are a lot, hook and bullet, we call them. And I would consider members of my family. I mean, I straddle the middle there with a lot of this stuff, because there's, you know, people that want to hunt and fish, and they really do care about habitat and caring for the earth for that purpose. And then you have the other side that's, you know, very much caring for the earth in just the fact that it should be cared for and it's beautiful, and so we kind of have different flavors of conservationists across all spectrums in the US. And I think one of the things that's really useful to do as someone in the space is to kind of appeal to the fact that, you know, if you could, it's sad to say, but sometimes you have to take the climate piece out of it sometimes, because I cannot change whether or not a factory emits all this stuff. You know, like a lot of that is outside of my control. And I think that's a lot of the problem that a lot of people in the US have with this is like, what can I even do about that? You know, like I can buy an electric vehicle, or maybe you can't. Like that's might even be a privileged thing to say. Like people can't do these things if it's not being regulated or other things like that. So they get frustrated and they just stop there and call it woke or whatever else. But in reality, I think the best way to reach people is to, and that's one of the great things about the center too, is we if you look at our social media stats, we have people on both sides, like very evenly split too. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that we bring it back to the faith and back to scripture, where you can see, like, it says that you need to care for the earth. So you kind of don't have anywhere else to go with that if you're Christian. Like it says you got to do this. So then how do you do it? How can you make a difference? Well, people can plant trees and they're helping climate change, and you don't message it that way. You can message it like you're planting trees, you're cleaning the air, you're doing this for biodiversity. And so if you bring it down to people, like what they can change and why it's helpful, and just kind of take this intangible climate thing out of it, it really does move people to do more. It just kind of neutralizes the playing field, I guess. That's just the approach that I take. And to be honest, we're so polarized over here on both sides that it's like it's really sad. But if you can find the middle ground of certain things and latch onto it, then you just ignore that other stuff, because otherwise we'll just be losing our minds.
We found in our community here, so we have half of our members are from Hong Kong, and we talk about the common grace that is creation in nature, that it is something that we all have in common, and that it is also common grace, and that it is not judgmental, as in you could be a murderer and still go on a walk and enjoy the beauty of the woods. It doesn't kind of reject you. So I think it shows a common grace. But that could be some of the common ground as well. Is that there's, in a sense, it's no matter who or what your background is, the ability to engage with the beauty. But I think there's also questions about who can engage with what. Bryony, you have a question? I think this is gonna be our last question then.
It's not me, it's Jonathan.
Hi.
Oh, Jonathan.
Hi. Yeah, I'm here. My question was really about the fact that we are in an urban space. The UK is a substantially urban country. We've recently sort of had contacts with someone in Bristol, where we're based, that is trying to set up a pollinator corridor. And I just wondered whether you had any advice or guidance or examples of that, particularly if it involved both a variety of churches and individuals with their own front gardens and the like, you know, all contributing a small piece of the jigsaw.
Yeah. So that actually is something that I added to another talk recently. So the Laudato Si movement is the national, it's an international Catholic environmental organization. And I just did a talk for them on biodiversity. And at the very end of it, I showed a map of all of the different churches in the United States. Like, if you could then connect all of these and create a corridor, how big of an impact that would be. And I use an example of, we have a few species of insects here, a really cool butterfly here, but like if I plant its host plant here, even though it lives 3 miles away, nobody else has this host plant, so it doesn't come to my yard. So I think that's a really important concept, and I don't personally yet for us have an example of it done well, but I will say that there have been some rumblings out in the West Coast of some Jesuits wanting to create something like that in their properties. And we're working on, with this Notre Dame project, we're going to start linking up possible pathways of like the best pathways to do that for certain critters. And I think that author, Doug Tallamy, his book called Bringing Nature Home is really wonderful if anybody is interested in learning about, the native plant piece of it, although it does focus on US native plants. But having even front gardens, small gardens, there's a lot of research that suggests that even like a patio or anything, if you're putting certain species on that, it does matter. It does make a difference. So I think just promoting, even if you have a very small space, what you do with that space can make a difference. And especially if you are doing it in conjunction with other people. So I'm sorry, I don't have really good examples of it, but just more support to say that like it is important, and I think it can definitely be done. And then I would also say, along with that, the way water is managed in urban spaces can make a big difference. We have a couple urbanized churches that we know of in Baltimore down here, and actually a couple in DC too, that have permeable pavers and different ways to manage that water to help reduce the impacts on the different watersheds and stream incision and things like that. So there's green roofs, things like that.
Thank you.
Love it. Really good. Thanks so much. I have to say, Laudato Si is kind of the single book that I recommend to people when they say, oh, I'm interested in this, because it's just so succinct and so powerful, and there's so much in it, but also just the continual link of climate, biodiversity back to justice and back and forth, and seeing it as a justice issue just consistently. I think that's so important and wonderful and beautiful. And also the idea of climate conversion, I think, is wonderful, because here in the UK, I think it's the same that you're kind of saying about America, is that most people want to do something, but just where do you start? It feels so overwhelming. And so to see it as a climate conversion where it's just, I think what we're trying to say here is that the first emotion doesn't have to be guilt. It can be just small steps. And when you do it with other people, it can encourage you when it becomes a community-led thing rather than just an individual kind of eco footprint thing. I think it's more encouraging as well. Yeah, so fantastic for all you shared and what you're doing. And I want to stay in touch. I think what you're doing, it resonates so much with Hazelnut and so many people that we're kind of connected with as well. So a big thanks. Really, thanks so much for coming and speaking with us. I'm just going to end with a quick announcement. Yeah, thanks. So just to say, this is the first of our talks, and we're kind of doing one a week. So next week is our next talk for an hour again at 7:30, and we're going to have Anu. And Anu is helps with these, and she is going to speak on building communities for eco-justice. And so she's especially also going to look at issues of race and building those communities of eco-justice. And then the week after that, on the 17th, is Alistair McIntosh, and his talk is going to be called "Prayer as the Cosmic Root of Poetry." I mean, that's got a lot of ways it can go. I'm really looking forward to see where he's going to take it. And then because it's half term, we're taking a little bit of time off, and we'll be back on the 7th of November. And I'm going to be speaking with Regina, who is involved with the Russia. And our topic is going to be unlocking the power of church land. So it's going to be definitely it'll be actually a great bookend for this talk, because it'll be bringing up some of those topics again and thinking about the power of church land. So again, big thank you, Kat, and thanks for all that you do, and thanks for everyone who came. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording now.